He smiled while signing away fates. He drank wine while others vanished. He walked into a building that held the country's deepest secrets and walked out with documents worth tens of thousands in cash. At first, it was just names. Then it became entire lives. He knew what would happen to them. He knew who he had exposed, and he knew exactly what the cost would be. But he did not stop. He fooled everyone, his colleagues, his wife, his bosses, the polygraph, his country. And every time he got paid, he wanted more. The CIA thought he was theirs, but he was already planning his future on the other side. In this video, you will see how one man destroyed entire operations, betrayed top agents, and made the entire system look the other way. And most importantly, how he almost got away with everything. Watch until the end. Because the real story is not the betrayal. It is who allowed it to happen. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. Mexico City, 1981. The perfect backdrop for secrets and shifting allegiances. Aldrich Ames arrived with a clear mission: turn Soviet intelligence officers into American assets. His primary target was Igor Shurigin, the KGB's chief of counterintelligence, a formidable opponent by any measure. What happened next defied every rule in the intelligence playbook. Instead of playing the careful game of recruitment, Ames found something entirely different: a drinking companion. The two men would disappear into the city's nightlife for marathon sessions lasting 17 hours. 17 hours of alcohol, conversation, and something far more dangerous: mutual understanding. During these binges, something fundamental shifted in Ames's worldview. The Soviets weren't the faceless enemy he'd been trained to see. They were human, flawed, perhaps even more honest about their intentions than his own government. His friend David Sampson later recalled how Ames dismissed President Reagan's rhetoric about the evil empire. To Ames, it was theater, manufactured paranoia designed to justify policies that might actually provoke the very conflict they claimed to prevent. Meanwhile, his personal life crumbled. A bitter divorce drained his finances and fueled his drinking. There were nights he'd be pulled over by Mexican police, too intoxicated to answer basic questions. His performance reviews painted a picture of a man losing his grip. Yet somehow, failure became promotion. When he returned to Langley 2 years later, they handed him the keys to the Soviet branch of the counterintelligence group, the very department tasked with protecting American agents operating behind enemy lines. His new boss, Rod Carlson, knew nothing of his alcoholism or poor performance. The CIA's culture of compartmentalization had created a perfect blind spot. But there was one bright spot in his deteriorating life. Rosario, a Colombian cultural attaché from a well-connected political family. Their relationship offered him a glimpse of the luxury and status he craved, but could never afford on his government salary. The stage was set. Access to the most sensitive secrets in American intelligence, financial pressure, and a growing cynicism about the cause he'd sworn to serve. Behind the Iron Curtain, a network of brave individuals risked everything to feed intelligence to the West. These weren't mercenaries or thrill seekers. They were true believers who'd seen the corruption of the system from within. Valery Martinov walked through the doors of the Soviet embassy in Washington as a third secretary. His real job was gathering scientific and technical secrets for the KGB. But something unexpected happened during those routine meetings with American contacts. He found himself intrigued by more than just intelligence. He discovered the game itself. One officer later described Martinov's motivation in simple terms. It was the excitement. He didn't see Americans as enemies. The Cold War, to him, was an elaborate performance, and he wanted to play both sides. Sergei Motorin's path to betrayal was messier. Blackmail. The FBI had photographs of his affair with a local woman. His diplomatic immunity couldn't protect him from exposure, and the shame would destroy his career and family. So he made a choice: cooperation in exchange for silence. Both men fed the CIA invaluable intelligence from inside the heart of Soviet operations in Washington. Names, methods, targets, everything the Americans needed to understand their adversaries. But perhaps the most valuable asset was someone whose true identity remained hidden for decades. Dmitry Polyakov operated under diplomatic cover at the United Nations in New York. For over 20 years, he supplied the CIA with intelligence that shaped American understanding of Soviet capabilities. Chemical formulas for secret writing, missile system specifications, nuclear strategy documents, even details about biological warfare research. His methods were elegant in their simplicity. A fishing expedition in New Delhi, where conversations were secretly recorded. A burst transmitter in Moscow that could send encrypted messages to the American embassy in just 2.6 seconds as he passed by on a streetcar. A modified clock that would light up when the agency confirmed they'd retrieved his latest drop. Money meant nothing to Polyakov. The CIA offered payments, but he accepted only token gifts worth a few $100s. His motivation ran deeper than greed. He despised the system he served and saw cooperation with the West as his contribution to eventual freedom. These were the people whose names now sat in Aldrich Ames's files. Men who had risked everything based on the promise that America would protect its sources. That promise was about to be broken. April 1985 marked the beginning of the end for American intelligence in the Soviet Union. Ames later claimed financial desperation drove his decision. His divorce had left him struggling to make ends meet, and his new life with Rosario required furnishing an apartment he couldn't afford. The gap between his desires and his government salary had become unbearable. But was money really the only factor? Or had years of disillusionment finally reached a breaking point? The method was almost casual in its audacity. Ames simply walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, approached a guard, and handed over a letter addressed to the KGB station chief. Inside, he'd written the names of several Soviet citizens who'd volunteered their services to the CIA. The price, $50,000. A month later, he sat across from Sergei Chuvakin at a Washington restaurant. To any observer, it looked like a routine recruitment lunch, an American intelligence officer trying to flip a Soviet diplomat. Instead, Chuvakin slid an envelope containing the requested cash across the table. $50,000. More than enough to solve his immediate financial problems. But something strange happened after that first payment. Instead of satisfaction, Ames felt an almost intoxicating rush of power. Here was a man who'd felt overlooked and undervalued throughout his career, suddenly holding information worth millions to a foreign government. When later questioned about his continued spying, he struggled to explain the psychology behind his escalation. Fear, certainly. He'd crossed a line and couldn't return. But there was something else. A recognition that he held something invaluable, and the Soviets were willing to pay accordingly. June 1985. Ames walked out of Langley carrying plastic bags filled with classified documents. Among them were the real names and operational details of Valery Martynov and Sergei Motorin, the two Soviet diplomats secretly working for the CIA. During his later testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee, the exchange was chilling in its simplicity. When you gave these names, Mr. Ames, did you have any realization of the significance of what you were doing? As to the danger that these people would be in? Yes, I did. Did it occur to you that they might be eliminated? Yes, it did. I did not agonize over it. Those words would haunt American intelligence for decades. Here was a man who understood the consequences of his actions with perfect clarity and proceeded anyway. The first signs of catastrophe appeared gradually, like cracks in a dam before the flood. Soviet agents who had fed intelligence to the CIA for years suddenly went silent. Some disappeared entirely. Others surfaced in Soviet custody, their fates sealed. The carefully constructed network that had taken decades to build began collapsing almost overnight. Viktor Yurchenko, a senior KGB officer, defected to the United States that same year. His information painted a terrifying picture of Soviet penetration into American intelligence. He identified Ronald Pelton, an NSA analyst who'd been selling signals intelligence. He revealed Edward Lee Howard, a CIA officer turned Soviet asset. But Yurchenko's most chilling revelations concerned the KGB's methods. He described a secret laboratory in Moscow where scientists developed untraceable poisons, the kind used against Bulgarian journalist Georgy Markov, who'd been stabbed with a ricin-filled pellet delivered via umbrella while walking across London's Waterloo Bridge. The irony was inescapable. Here was Ames, debriefing a defector who was exposing Soviet operations while simultaneously feeding those same Soviets American secrets. The compartmentalization that had allowed him to rise through the ranks now protected him from detection. When Yurchenko inexplicably returned to Moscow after 3 months, leaving intelligence analysts questioning his true loyalties, he took Martinov with him. The KGB had made an unusual request for the scientific intelligence officer to escort the apparent redefector home. Martinov never returned. Within months, both he and Motorin faced the consequences of their cooperation with the Americans. Swift trials, swifter justice. The CIA found itself facing an unprecedented crisis. Their Soviet operations had been gutted, but they couldn't understand how. The possibility of a mole within their ranks was almost too devastating to contemplate. Instead, they focused on technical explanations, compromised communications, lucky counterintelligence work, anything but the truth. Edward Lee Howard became a convenient scapegoat. The KGB, with masterful misdirection, encouraged this theory. Let the Americans chase ghosts while the real source continued his deadly work. Meanwhile, Ames prepared for his next assignment. Rome awaited, along with new opportunities to access and betray classified information. Summer 1986 brought new possibilities and familiar dangers. Before departing for Rome, Ames faced a mandatory polygraph examination, standard procedure for CIA officers heading overseas. The KGB had prepared him well. Get proper rest, stay calm, build rapport with the examiner. When asked about foreign intelligence contacts, deflect rather than deny. The strategy worked perfectly. When questioned about potential approaches by hostile services, Ames expressed concern about future targeting in Rome, a response that satisfied the examiner completely. Years later, FBI analysis would reveal clear signs of deception in those same test results, but at the time, he passed without suspicion. Rome offered everything a spy could desire: legitimate reasons to meet with Soviets, access to classified materials, and the perfect cover of diplomatic social life. Alexei Krenkov became his new handler, officially a Soviet diplomat, whom Ames was supposedly trying to recruit. Their meetings appeared routine to any observer, just another CIA officer working his contacts. In reality, each lunch produced $20,000 to $50,000 in exchange for shopping bags filled with classified documents. The volume was staggering. By his own estimate, Ames passed along 1,000 documents per year, so many that the KGB's small analysis team in Moscow struggled to process everything. They actually requested he slow down his production. But the most dangerous intelligence involved operations beyond his immediate access. CIA agents throughout Eastern Europe found their covers blown, their networks rolled up, their lives endangered. The ripple effects of Ames' betrayal spread far beyond Soviet-American relations. His lifestyle in Rome reflected his new wealth: expensive suits, fine dining, extended lunches that left him too intoxicated to work afternoons. When he passed out in the street after an embassy reception, colleagues attributed it to the diplomatic party circuit rather than espionage-funded excess. The money required careful handling. Swiss bank accounts provided the necessary secrecy, including one established in his mother-in-law's name with himself as trustee. Switzerland's banking laws offered perfect protection for his growing fortune. By the time the Ames family, now including young son Paul, returned to Washington in 1989, they possessed wealth far beyond any government salary. The challenge would be explaining their newfound prosperity without raising suspicions. Back in Washington, the CIA could no longer ignore the obvious. Their Soviet operations had been systematically destroyed, leaving behind only questions and suspicion. Jeanne Vertefeuille represented everything the agency valued: dedication, analytical rigor, and institutional loyalty. She'd risen from typist to become one of the CIA's leading experts on Soviet intelligence. With no family distractions, the agency consumed her life completely. Her small mole-hunting team faced an almost impossible task. Somewhere within the vast CIA bureaucracy lurked a traitor whose actions had cost lives and national security. But where to begin? The potential suspects numbered in the hundreds, and the evidence remained circumstantial. For 2 years, they chased technical explanations, compromised communications, sophisticated Soviet counterintelligence operations, anything except the possibility that one of their own had deliberately betrayed his country. The breakthrough came from the most obvious source: money. Ames's spending had become impossible to ignore. A $540,000 house paid for in cash, a Jaguar in the driveway, expensive furnishings, and a lifestyle that screamed wealth far beyond his government salary. When questioned, Ames had ready explanations. Rosario's family connections in Colombia provided convenient cover for his sudden prosperity. Her relatives were wealthy, politically connected, and generous to their American son-in-law. Dan Payne, a member of the mole-hunting team, finally sounded the alarm in December 1990. His memo to the CIA's Office of Security was blunt. Ames's lavish spending over 5 years required immediate investigation. He emphasized the urgency of the situation, but urgency proved relative within the intelligence bureaucracy. The Iran-Contra scandal consumed the agency's attention and resources. A potentially traitorous analyst seemed less pressing than congressional investigations and political damage control. The delay nearly proved fatal to the investigation. While bureaucrats debated priorities, Ames continued his deadly work. Now assigned to the Counterintelligence Center, he led analysis of Soviet intelligence activities while simultaneously feeding classified information to those same Soviets. The KGB recognized the risks of continued personal meetings and suggested a more secure communication method: dead drops. Predetermined locations where Ames could leave materials without direct contact with handlers. A chalk mark on a Georgetown mailbox would signal a package waiting at Bethesda's pedestrian footbridge. Payment would arrive later at a separate location, often a drain pipe in Maryland's Wheaton Regional Park. By December 1991, as the Soviet Union collapsed, Ames worried about his future income. But the transition proved seamless. The KGB simply rebranded as the SVR, and his payments continued without interruption. The mole hunters, meanwhile, finally gained FBI partnership for their investigation. Counterintelligence on American soil fell under federal jurisdiction, bringing fresh resources and investigative powers to the case. The evidence slowly accumulated like snow in winter, individually insignificant, collectively overwhelming. Financial records revealed deposits of hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, far exceeding any legitimate explanation. When investigators examined the timing of these deposits, a pattern emerged that would prove devastating. Sandy Grimes, a CIA officer reviewing bank statements, noticed something remarkable. Ames's large cash deposits consistently coincided with his lunches with Sergei Chuvakin, the same Soviet official he'd been meeting since his first betrayal in 1985. This was the connection they'd been seeking. Not conclusive proof, but a thread that tied together years of suspicious activity. The FBI escalated their investigation. A search of Ames' office at the Counter-Narcotics Center revealed classified documents completely unrelated to drug enforcement, specifically materials concerning Soviet anti-submarine warfare. What possible legitimate reason could a counter-narcotics analyst have for accessing naval intelligence? Meanwhile, Ames remained oblivious to the growing scrutiny. He sent reassuring messages to his SVR handlers, confirming that all appeared normal and no suspicion had fallen on him. The investigators faced a delicate balance. They needed definitive proof of espionage, but surveillance carried enormous risks. If Ames detected the investigation, he might flee to Moscow, just as Edward Lee Howard had done years earlier. Les Weiser, an FBI agent, made a decision that violated direct orders but proved crucial to the case. Despite being told not to search Ames's trash due to the risks involved, he did it anyway during one of Ames's work trips. Among the discarded papers, agents found a draft post-it note that changed everything. Ames had written about meeting the SVR in Bogota, Colombia, explaining he couldn't read their signals for a week in September due to travel plans. If the meeting couldn't occur, they should leave a message at the drainpipe dead drop location. The evidence was now overwhelming, but timing became critical. The CIA had scheduled Ames for a trip to Moscow in February 1994. Canceling it would alert him to their suspicions, but allowing him to travel might mean losing him forever. Moscow had already promised him land along a riverbank where he could build his dream home. Electronic surveillance provided the final pieces. Wiretaps on his home phone captured conversations between Ames and Rosario about his meetings with Russians. Hidden microphones recorded her saying, "Well, honey, I hope you didn't screw up," about one of his missions. Access to his computer revealed the complete architecture of his espionage. Signal sites, dead drop locations, communication protocols. The FBI photographed him making chalk marks on mailboxes, confirming their understanding of his methods. February 21st, 1994 arrived with manufactured urgency. Ames received a call requesting his presence at Langley for important intelligence briefings before his Moscow trip. It was President's Day, unusual for such meetings, but the explanation seemed plausible. He pulled out of his Arlington driveway and turned onto the next street, beginning his final journey as a free man. The interrogation room walls told the complete story of his treachery. Photographs of dead drop sites, maps of signal locations, pictures from every city where he'd operated. When FBI agent John Lewis described Ames's reaction to author David Wise, the image was devastating. A man whose head sank as he surveyed the evidence, unable to look up at his captors. The scope of his betrayal defied comprehension. At least 14 Soviet agents who'd risked their lives for American intelligence were exposed. 10 faced swift trials and swifter justice. Among them was Dmitry Polyakov, the GRU colonel who'd served the CIA for over 2 decades, motivated not by money, but by his hatred of communist corruption. Polyakov had returned to Moscow in 1980, looking forward to retirement after years of dangerous service. Instead, he spent 8 years under surveillance before his final arrest and demise. His loss particularly devastated CIA officers who'd worked with him, knowing that his cooperation had sprung from genuine conviction rather than financial incentive. During Ames's debriefing with Jean Vertefeuille, he revealed the full extent of his calculating betrayal. When he realized the KGB was systematically eliminating American assets at an alarming rate, he'd tried to deflect suspicion onto Vertefeuille herself, the very woman now questioning him in shackles. Vertefeuille later described her initial reaction as wanting to strangle him, followed by laughter at the absurdity of his suggestion. Here was the actual traitor, attempting to frame the dedicated officer who'd spent years hunting him down. Ames's court appearance provided little satisfaction for those seeking remorse. His statement acknowledged the catastrophe his betrayal had brought upon his family and expressed sympathy for those who'd suffered from his actions. He claimed no punishment could balance his profound shame and guilt, but his words rang hollow. The men he'd betrayed faced bullets to the head. Ames faced life imprisonment in a federal facility with medical care, educational opportunities, and regular family visits. Rosario's fate sparked additional controversy. She portrayed herself as a victim of manipulation, claiming ignorance of her husband's espionage until discovering a mysterious note about a Colombian meeting. She hated him for deceiving her about the source of their wealth, attributing it to an old college friend named Robert who'd supposedly invested money through Ames. But both Rosario and Aldrich failed polygraph examinations about when she truly learned of his espionage activities. The evidence suggested her knowledge came far earlier than she claimed, yet her sentence reflected judicial sympathy, just over 5 years in prison, serving 4.5 with good behavior. Today, Aldrich Ames serves life without parole at the Federal Correctional Institution in Terre Haute, Indiana. His case prompted wholesale changes in American counterintelligence procedures, mandatory financial monitoring for employees with access to classified information, and skepticism about the polygraph testing that had failed so completely. But perhaps the most lasting legacy involves the human cost of betrayal. Somewhere in Russia, there may still be unmarked graves of men who believed America would protect those who risked everything for freedom. Their names remain classified, their sacrifices largely unknown, their families left to wonder why their loved ones simply vanished one day. The Cold War may have ended, but the price of betrayal echoes across decades, reminding us that in the shadow world of espionage, trust remains both the most valuable currency and the most dangerous vulnerability.